What if the story we've always been told about Adam, the first man, wasn't the full story? What if the most important parts were hidden, left out, or locked away in forbidden books? Before Cain murdered Abel, before the exile from Eden hardened into myth, there was a man whose story has been mostly erased from the pages of history. And that man, Adam, might be far more complex, tragic, and spiritually profound than you've ever imagined. Most people think they know Adam's story. He was created by God, placed in a paradise, tempted by Eve and the serpent, then cast out of Eden for disobedience. The next thing we hear, his sons are fighting, and one kills the other. But what about the space in between, the emotional fallout, the exile, the regret, the day-to-day struggles of the world's first human learning to survive outside perfection? That silence is deafening. And that silence invites questions. Why did the Bible leave so many parts of Adam's life in the shadows? In fact, when you read the canonical book of Genesis carefully, Adam is more of a figurehead than a fleshed-out character. He speaks only a handful of times. His internal world is almost entirely absent. We don't see him wrestle with guilt, or try to reconnect with God, or teach his children about Eden. There are decades, possibly centuries of his life that remain unspoken, and for a figure so central to human origin, that absence is both strange and telling. That's where the lost texts come in. Ancient writings that were excluded from the Bible, sometimes by vote, sometimes by politics, sometimes by accident, fill in those haunting gaps. These apocryphal books, such as The Life of Adam and Eve or The Apocalypse of Moses, paint a vastly different picture. They show Adam not as a flat symbol of failure, but as a man in deep sorrow, seeking redemption, receiving visions, and even conversing with angels. These stories didn't make it into the Bible, but they were passed around, cherished, and studied for centuries by those who wanted more. And they give us a glimpse into the hidden story of Adam before Cain and Abel ever came into the picture. Beyond the thin details provided in Genesis, a hidden library of ancient texts offers an alternate lens on Adam's life, a lens so vivid, so emotionally raw, that it makes the familiar biblical version feel almost incomplete. These writings, known as apocryphal or non-canonical texts, were written and circulated widely in ancient Jewish and early Christian communities. Chief among them are The Life of Adam and Eve, The Book of Adam, and The Apocalypse of Moses. Though they never made it into the official Bible, they offer some of the most fascinating and haunting descriptions of Adam's life after Eden. The Life of Adam and Eve, sometimes known as the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, exists in multiple languages: Greek, Latin, Slavonic, Armenian, and more. Each version adds new flavor to the story, but the core remains consistent. These texts pick up right where Genesis drops off. Adam and Eve cast out from Eden, left to fend for themselves in a harsh and unfamiliar world. But instead of skipping to Cain and Abel, these writings slow down time. They show Adam and Eve grappling with pain, starvation, loneliness, and grief. Adam isn't just a passive figure anymore. He becomes a broken man seeking to understand his fall and reconnect with the divine. In these apocryphal books, Adam goes through a profound spiritual evolution. He fasts, he mourns, he cries rivers of tears, he is visited by angels, warned by Satan, and even shown visions of future events. There's a heartbreaking moment in the life of Adam and Eve, where Adam lies on his deathbed and tells his son, Seth, the entire story of their exile and suffering. He asks for forgiveness, not just from God, but from his children for bringing them into a world of pain. It's not a tale of mere punishment. It's a deeply human portrayal of regret, accountability, and spiritual longing. So why were these books left out of the Bible? The reasons are complex. Some of the texts were simply too new to be included when the canon was being finalized in the 4th century. Others were viewed as too mystical, too speculative, or too out of alignment with developing Orthodox theology. Many early Christian leaders feared that these writings gave too much human emotion, or even too much power to figures like Adam and Eve. In some versions, Adam is shown receiving divine knowledge or prophecy, ideas that were seen as theologically dangerous or misleading by certain church authorities. Additionally, the presence of supernatural beings like Satan, who interacts with Adam repeatedly, and detailed descriptions of heaven and hell, made some of these stories feel more mythic than doctrinal. As Christianity grew more centralized and institutionalized, there was a strong push to keep the official canon tight, consistent, and theologically safe. Anything that suggested alternate interpretations of creation, sin, or salvation was often labeled heretical or apocryphal and cast aside. But despite their exclusion, these forbidden books refused to die. They were copied, translated, preserved, and studied by mystics, monks, and scholars across centuries. In them, Adam is no longer just the man who failed humanity. He becomes a tragic hero, a father figure, a repentant soul, a man searching for grace in a world he helped break. These texts don't just add depth to Adam's character, they reshape the way we understand the origins of human suffering and the possibility of redemption. They reveal a version of Adam that's emotional, conflicted, deeply spiritual, and profoundly human. And perhaps that's why they were so dangerous to include. Because if Adam is more like us than we ever imagined, then maybe our story too is still being written. When Adam was cast out of Eden, it wasn't just a physical exile, it was a spiritual rupture. He didn't merely lose a garden, he lost intimacy with the divine, the ease of innocence, and the unbroken connection to the Creator that defined his earliest existence. In the canonical Bible, this emotional and spiritual descent is left almost entirely to the imagination. But in the apocryphal texts, particularly the life of Adam and Eve, we find a portrait of a man shattered by grief, tormented by guilt, and striving desperately for redemption. This is the side of Adam most people have never seen. Not the man who brought sin into the world, but the man who wanted to make things right. The depth of Adam's regret in these stories is staggering. Upon leaving Eden, he collapses into mourning. According to the apocryphal accounts, Adam and Eve weep for days, their cries echoing through the barren wilderness. Adam blames himself relentlessly, not just for his own fall, but for dragging Eve and all future generations into suffering. In the life of Adam and Eve, there are moments where Adam throws himself into rivers, fasting and refusing to eat, praying for death, pleading for forgiveness. He is no longer the passive figure of Genesis. He is a broken soul consumed by the weight of cosmic consequences. What makes these texts so profound is the way they trace Adam's transformation from guilt into spiritual growth. He doesn't remain in a state of despair. Instead, he turns to penance. He subjects himself to intense acts of self-denial, entering caves to fast, covering himself in sackcloth, and spending days in deep meditation and prayer. In one version of the story, Adam immerses himself in the waters of the Jordan River for 40 days, hoping the river will cleanse his sin and restore his connection with God. This isn't just symbolic, it mirrors the later stories of prophets and saints who use suffering as a path toward enlightenment and purification. Angelic visitations also play a critical role in Adam's spiritual evolution. In the apocryphal texts, God doesn't entirely abandon Adam. Instead, he sends angels to comfort, instruct, and even warn him. Michael, the archangel, appears repeatedly, sometimes to explain divine justice, sometimes to help Adam understand his purpose. In one powerful moment, Michael reassures Adam that his repentance has not gone unheard. that his struggle is part of a much larger plan. These angelic encounters blur the line between myth and mysticism, offering a deeply symbolic view of divine mercy and human effort. In traditional doctrine, Adam is often flattened into a theological symbol, more an origin point than a person. He's blamed for the fall, mentioned in Paul's epistles as the reason for original sin, and then largely disappears from the narrative. But in these older, non-canonical stories, Adam becomes a relatable figure. He isn't just the one who failed. He's the one who tried to recover, who didn't give up on his relationship with God, even when it seemed impossible. He struggles with questions that still haunt humanity today. Am I forgivable? Can I be redeemed? Is suffering the price of knowledge or the beginning of wisdom? Even his relationship with Eve becomes more emotionally nuanced in these texts. They are not just co-defendants in a divine courtroom. They are partners in grief, companions in exile. Together they build altars, pray for guidance, and raise their children in a world they no longer understand. There's even tenderness between them, a shared pain that turns their love into something more than mere origin. Eve, at times, blames herself. Adam, in return, comforts her. This portrayal challenges the simplistic blame often placed solely on Eve and restores a balance to their partnership. Another stunning detail found in these ancient writings is Adam's view of death. In the canonical Bible, we're told that death enters the world through sin, but little is said about how Adam feels facing mortality. In the apocryphal texts, Adam has visions of his own death. He prepares for it like a prophet preparing for a sacred journey. He speaks to his children, blesses them, and confesses his sorrow. He doesn't deny what happened, he owns it. And in doing so, he elevates the moment of death into something meaningful, even holy. His final act is not one of despair, but of spiritual clarity. This version of Adam, as a man of emotion, faith, sorrow, and resilience, is a stark contrast to the silent figure of Genesis. And perhaps that's why these stories continue to resonate. They show that even the first man, the archetype of human fallibility, had a spiritual journey. He didn't just fall, he fought to rise again. He didn't just sin, he sought to understand. And in that struggle, we find something profoundly human, the idea that redemption is not just about being forgiven, but about the relentless pursuit of becoming better. When we look beyond the biblical narrative and scan the mythologies of ancient civilizations, we begin to notice a striking pattern. Adam is not alone. Across cultures and continents, there emerges a recurring figure, the first man, a being formed by divine hands or mystical forces placed in a world of beauty or danger and destined to fall, suffer, and search for meaning. This archetype speaks to something ancient and universal in the human psyche, the deep need to explain our origins, our suffering, and our longing for redemption. And when we place Adam alongside figures like Prometheus, Enkidu, or even Manu from Hindu tradition, the similarities are too profound to ignore. Take Prometheus, for instance. In Greek mythology, Prometheus defies the gods to bring fire to humanity, an act of rebellion that results in divine punishment. He is chained to a rock, doomed to have his liver eaten daily by an eagle as penance for his transgression. While Prometheus is not the first man, he embodies a parallel concept, the bridge between divine knowledge and human struggle. Like Adam, Prometheus disrupts divine order, not out of malice, but out of a desire to elevate humankind. And like Adam, his punishment echoes through the fate of all humanity, who inherit both the gift and the curse of his choice. Then there's Enkidu from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. Created by the gods to humble Gilgamesh, Enkidu begins his life as a wild man, living among animals. But once he is introduced to human civilization through a woman, he becomes civilized, gains knowledge, and loses his innocence. The fall from a state of nature into awareness is a central theme, mirroring Adam's journey from Edenic purity to exiled consciousness. Enkidu, too, is punished by the gods, not for disobedience, but simply for becoming self-aware, for transitioning into something more than what he was made to be. His death becomes a moment of existential awakening for Gilgamesh, just as Adam's story becomes the starting point for humanity's understanding of mortality. Across traditions, we also find variations of the first man motif. In Hindu texts, Manu survives a great flood and becomes the progenitor of humankind, guided by divine instruction and tasked with restoring order. In Norse mythology, Ask and Embla are the first humans, created by gods from trees, given breath, mind, and spirit, but left to wander and build civilization in a harsh world. The narrative is echoed in Native American, African, and Aboriginal lore as well. Stories of primordial beings formed from earth, breath, or bone, who are taught, tested, and cast into a broken world with the hope of transformation. What ties all these myths together is not just the origin of humanity, but the emotional trajectory that follows. These first beings are often gifted with knowledge or awareness that isolates them. They are exiled or punished or burdened with responsibility they never asked for. The knowledge they gain, whether it's of good and evil, of civilization, of fire, or of mortality, comes at a cost. And yet, within that cost lies a hidden gift, the beginning of purpose. Through suffering, these figures do not vanish, they evolve, they become more human. In this light, Adam's story becomes part of a larger mythic tradition, not merely a standalone biblical tale. His exile from Eden mirrors the cosmic pattern of separation from the divine, the loss of innocence, and the struggle toward redemption that mythologies around the world have echoed for millennia. Whether the myth comes from clay tablets in Sumer or scrolls in Jerusalem, the message remains eerily consistent. Humanity's beginning is marked by a fall, but that fall is also the start of our journey toward meaning. These parallels don't diminish Adam's story, they deepen it. They show that the biblical narrative, rather than being isolated or exclusive, is part of a vast, interconnected human tapestry. Adam stands not just as a religious figure, but as a mythic symbol of all of us, torn between the divine and the mortal, burdened with knowledge, and forever searching for a way back home. Shall I continue with Section 5? The mysterious first children? The story of Cain and Abel is so iconic, so emotionally charged, that it often overshadows a strange and lingering question. Were they truly Adam and Eve's first children? The book of Genesis names Cain as the firstborn and Abel as his younger brother, with the tragic tale of jealousy and murder unfolding shortly after. But a deeper look into ancient traditions, both Jewish and Islamic, suggests there may have been others before them, children not mentioned in the official biblical account. Children whose existence adds new layers of mystery, tension, and complexity to the earliest family in history. In Genesis 5:4, an easy-to-overlook line reads, "After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters." This throwaway sentence, casually tucked away, opens a massive door of speculation. Who were these sons and daughters? Why aren't their names recorded? And more provocatively, were they born before or after Cain and Abel? The traditional narrative assumes they came later, but in several ancient Jewish texts as well as Islamic commentary, there are whispers of an older, more complex family structure. According to some Jewish midrashic sources, Adam and Eve were not alone in the wilderness after their expulsion. They had daughters, many of them. One of the most frequently mentioned is a woman named Awan, sometimes identified as Cain's sister and even his wife. Other names like Azura appear in similar commentaries, each tied to Cain or Seth in various genealogical traditions. This might sound strange, even uncomfortable, but in ancient times, marrying a sibling was not seen as taboo in the same way it is today, especially when the survival of the human race depended on it. Islamic traditions also offer a fascinating perspective. In some hadith and tafsir literature, it's believed that Adam and Eve had twins, each birth producing one boy and one girl. Cain and Abel, for example, were born with twin sisters. When God commanded that each son marry the twin of the other, Cain refused, desiring to marry his own sister, whom he found more beautiful. This jealousy and disobedience, not merely God's favor of Abel's sacrifice, is what sparked Cain's murderous rage. In this telling, the crime of the first murder becomes not only an act of violence, but a tangled web of forbidden desire and broken family dynamics. These traditions don't exist to scandalize or contradict the Bible. Instead, they reflect the oral and interpretive richness of ancient religious cultures trying to fill in the gaps left by Scripture. The idea of Adam and Eve having daughters and of those daughters playing crucial roles in the unfolding drama suggests a much fuller, messier, and more human story. It reminds us that this wasn't just a theological tale, it was a family. Moreover, some apocryphal writings suggest that Adam may have fathered entire generations during his centuries-long life, establishing clans and lineages that predated the events of Cain and Abel. These speculative texts, sometimes rooted in Gnostic, Syriac, or even Ethiopian Christian traditions, hint at entire worlds lost to time, fragments of prehistory that challenge our understanding of biblical chronology. What's particularly compelling about these lesser-known accounts is the way they restore agency to figures who are otherwise silent. The daughters of Adam and Eve are not just names in a genealogy. They become real people with desires, conflicts, and destinies. In a world struggling to redefine itself after Eden, these unnamed children become essential actors in the human drama. Their existence challenges the neatness of the Genesis account and opens the door to a far more dynamic and evolving narrative. In peeling back these layers, we begin to see that the family of Adam and Eve was far from simple. Before Cain's jealousy boiled into bloodshed, before Abel's innocence was lost to the soil, there may have been others, quietly born, quietly forgotten, but no less vital to the origins of humanity. Their stories may be hidden in the margins, but their echoes still haunt the pages of ancient tradition. Before sin entered the world, before the serpent whispered, and before the first bite was taken, Adam existed in a state of pure potential. In most retellings of his story, the focus is so fixed on the fall that we forget to ask a more foundational question. What was Adam for? What was his original role in creation before disobedience redefined him? Ancient theological thought, both Jewish and Christian, offers profound insight into Adam's legacy before the fall, portraying him not merely as the first man, but as a cosmic priest, a steward of creation, and a reflection of the divine itself. The book of Genesis gives us clues if we know where to look. Adam is placed in Eden to work it and to keep it, two verbs that in Hebrew carry priestly overtones. The words abad and shamar are the same ones used later in Scripture to describe the duties of Levite priests who serve in the temple. In other words, Adam's role wasn't just agricultural, it was sacred. Eden wasn't merely a garden, it was a sanctuary, and Adam wasn't just a gardener, he was a priest. His job was to tend the holy space of creation, to keep it pure, to offer it back to God in harmony and obedience. This vision of Adam as priest is echoed in early Jewish literature, especially in texts like the Book of Jubilees and various rabbinic commentaries. Some rabbis viewed Adam's original role as one of cosmic significance, to name the animals not just as an act of classification, but as a form of spiritual dominion, an ordering of the world in alignment with divine wisdom. Naming in the Hebrew worldview was a creative act, mirroring the speech of God in creation. When Adam named the creatures, he was participating in the divine pattern, acting as an image bearer of the Creator. And it's that idea, the image of God, that stands at the heart of Adam's pre-fall identity. Genesis 1 declares that Adam was made in Tselem Elohim, the image of God. Early Christian theologians like Irenaeus and Augustine meditated deeply on this phrase. To be made in God's image, they argued, was not about physical form, but about authority, reason, morality, and communion. Adam was meant to reflect God's rule on earth, governing with justice, wisdom, and love. He was to be the mirror through which creation could see the face of its maker. Some thinkers even speculated that Adam's purpose extended beyond earth. Certain early Christian traditions suggested that Adam was destined to grow into divine likeness, to be not just an image, but a full participant in God's glory. The fall, then, wasn't just a moral failure, it was a derailment of a cosmic ascent. Humanity wasn't meant to be static in perfection, but to rise from innocence to holiness, from reflection to participation. The tree of life wasn't just a symbol of paradise, it was the pathway to divinization. In Jewish mystical thought, particularly in the Kabbalistic tradition, Adam is sometimes seen as Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, a metaphysical blueprint for all of reality. This Adam is not just the ancestor of humanity, but the prototype of existence itself. Before the fall, he was clothed in light, radiant with divine energy, the perfect vessel of balance between heaven and earth. When he sinned, that light was shattered, scattered into fragments, and part of humanity's spiritual mission is to gather those fragments, to restore the unity that was lost. All of these interpretations converge on a single idea. Adam was not created merely to exist, he was created to become. He was given purpose, sacred responsibility, and the potential to walk intimately with God. His fall is tragic not just because of what he did, but because of what was lost, what could have been. The world before the fall was not static or idle. It was brimming with purpose, with divine intention. Adam's legacy, then, is not simply about failure. It's about forgotten greatness, buried potential, and the mystery of what humanity was originally meant to be. Adam's story, as most of us know it, begins and ends with a fall. But as we've seen, there is so much more beneath the surface: hidden texts, ancient traditions, and deep theological insights that reveal a man far more complex than the one we've been taught to remember. Before Cain and Abel, before the blood and the blame, there was a soul grappling with divine silence, a priest in a shattered temple, a father burdened with regret and still reaching toward hope. Adam's hidden story is not just about the past, it's about the human condition itself. We've uncovered the ancient apocryphal books that dared to imagine Adam's life beyond Eden, the pain of exile, the yearning for forgiveness, and the raw emotional journey from guilt to grace. We've compared him to the great mythic figures of world literature, discovering that Adam is not just a biblical character but a universal symbol. In his silence we hear our own questions. In his fall we feel our own wounds. In his longing we glimpse the shared desire of all humanity, to be restored, to be seen, to find a way back to the sacred. But why does this story matter now in our world of noise, technology, and distraction? Because Adam's journey mirrors our own. We too are born into a world we didn't choose. We make mistakes we can't undo, we suffer consequences that ripple far beyond our intentions. Yet, like Adam, we also have the chance to respond, to pray, to reflect, to seek, to rebuild. His story reminds us that exile is not the end, that brokenness can lead to wisdom, that even in our most fallen moments, the divine is not far off. Adam's hidden story is a mirror, not just of what we lost, but of what we still might recover. It's a story of becoming, of failing, of rising again. And in a time when so many feel disconnected from faith, from purpose, from each other, his journey back toward meaning may be more relevant than ever. If this exploration opened your eyes to a side of Adam you've never seen before, don't let it end here. There's more to discover, more stories to tell, more truths hidden between the lines. So if you found this video thought-provoking, be sure to like it, share it, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Until next time, stay curious.